This is Breaking Down Security, and I am Brian Brake. Welcome back, listener. This is Brian and Mr. Boettcher for Breaking Down Security.
What's up?
Yes, Miss Amanda, Miss Berlin, she is coming back from GERCON, has a very short window of opportunity to spend with her family, and she's going to be heading back out to New York for the O'Reilly conference, which our good friends Jerry and Andy from Defensive Security are going to be at. So if you're in the New York area, there may still be tickets available for the O'Reilly conference. So, see if you can get out there. Miss Amanda is doing a workshop, I believe, reversing the kill chain. So if you can get out there and visit and join that, make sure you can do so. Mr. Boettcher, what's been going on this week?
Working, man. Working.
Yeah.
I integrated VirusTotal into LogMD, so that's going to come out in the next version.
Oh my goodness.
It works really well. So it kind of automates the checks that you want to do when you find a suspicious or malicious executable, and you want to just confirm if VirusTotal's seen it before. You can upload hashes, stuff like that. So it works really well.
How are you doing that? You can do that without a key?
You
Like
can do
an
that
API
without
key?
a key. There's a public key,
Uh-huh.
or you can have a private key if you pay for the private key, or you borrow someone's key. I don't know. I don't want to know. But yeah, it's like 4 a minute.
Right.
If you have the public key, and if it's a private key, you can flood them with requests.
Okay. Yeah, I was
Spit
worried
it back
about
out.
if your customers were going to abuse the public key, but okay, 4 minutes, not bad, I guess. So
Yeah, and
Yeah.
it automatically waits for you, so you don't have to worry about it. If you've got 100 to upload, then it'll take so and so many minutes.
right.
You don't have
right.
to worry about sitting there and doing it manually.
Okay. All right. Well, I'm not gonna, beat around the bush
Delay.
here. I'm gonna ask Mr. Boettcher a question. So, we have a guest tonight, a very, very special interview. Somebody I've been hearing his name in the past decade on various podcasts. As somebody who's knowledgeable about InfoSec. Mr. Boettcher, what does this gentleman mean to you when you hear his name?
It's always threat modeling. I mean, because he wrote the book on threat modeling.
Oh, well.
That's what he means to me.
Spoiler alert, buddy. Come on, man. Anyway, all right. Well, if you didn't figure out who the master of the threat model is, it's Adam Shostack. And welcome, Mr. Shostack, to this show.
Hey, it's a pleasure to be here.
Fantastic. So, for those people maybe who have never heard of you, maybe you could give us a little background on who you are and how you got to be where you're at today. Maybe a little bit of your origin story.
Sure. And let me just throw my phone. Random family phone call leading off here.
No worries.
So I got started in security longer ago than I want to admit. I broke a bunch of things like the TIS firewall toolkit and the secure ID card. Joined a startup to do vuln management before we had vuln management, so helped create the CVE while I was there. Moved on to a privacy startup in Montreal, building private browsing technologies. Moved from there to a startup to do some risk management. That one didn't work out. I joined Microsoft in 2006, and they said, this threat modeling thing isn't working quite right. Go do something about it. And so along the way, I created a tool, I created a game, made it work better, took some of that thinking, discovered the simplest way to make it available was to write a book. So wrote a book on threat modeling, did some work along there in usable security. I was responsible for pushing the auto run patch out to XP and Vista.
Mm-hmm.
And then did work with the company's chief security officer council, set out to build a startup that was going to going to help chief security officers manage their portfolio of investments better. Turns out we were too early for that. And so for the last year, give or take, I've been consulting and training around threat modeling and risk management and security engineering. Just got back from London, where I was at DevSecCon.
Nice.
Doing a training with them. And, I'm excited to be here tonight.
So that's all you've done. I mean, that's really hardly anything.
Yeah, I know, but I'm still young. So there's time to do more.
Right on. So I saw you. Well, I wanted to see you at Source Seattle. It was this is the second year I've gone. What do you think about the Source Seattle format?
So, I love what Rob is trying to do. I think he's bringing together a good conversational group of people, and I hope to see it grow. Yeah,
I actually like that too. I like the fact that it's not all about security. There was a public speaking presentation, or there was understanding security pitfalls and those things, and it was more than just talks. There was some speed networking, which I found quite interesting, where you're asking people questions about and meeting people in forced get together, which is something that most InfoSec organizations, cons don't do. They don't force the networking thing, which I found interesting. So I have to admit, I was sad. I ended up double booked that week. I was at the New Security Paradigms workshop. And I flew back Wednesday night. So I missed the first day and then a chunk of the second day because of a minor crisis at a client site. So I didn't see as much of Source Seattle as I had planned to. Yeah. But it sounds great. Yeah, I got to see your lightning talk that afternoon, and it was very good. So, which kind of leads us to why I wanted to have you on, because I didn't get to see your talk on security leadership lessons from the dark side. But I'd also wanted to discuss threat modeling, because that's your forte, that's your raison d'etre, raison d'etre. So maybe you could give us a definition. We like definitions. So what is threat modeling, and why do people do it, or why do organizations do it?
So threat modeling, I'll get to a definition in just a second. Let me start out by saying that everyone knows how to threat model. If I were to ask you to help me threat model my house, you would do so. And in the interest of time, I'm not going to actually do this little exercise with you, but you'd start talking about my doors and my windows and the valuables inside my house. And when we bring that thinking to software, sometimes we get it wrong. So what is threat modeling? Threat modeling is using models, abstractions, to think about the question of what can go wrong.
Right.
And people do it naturally. We grow up learning to think about what can go wrong. And organizations do it because they want to build better products, right? They want to build products where security is not a surprise to them. And so if you spend a little bit of energy up front saying, hey, what are we working on? What can go wrong? What are we going to do about it? You can focus all the remaining security activities that you want to do for that product, for that service, for that release cycle. And you can have some confidence that you're doing the right things based on that upfront investment of time. And that's why organizations do it. Is because it focuses everything else they're doing.
Okay. So why is it that it seems like a lot of companies are adverse to doing these things? Or, if we're so used to doing these on the reg, for just like, what happens if I drive in the snow, or, a mundane normal task, why is it that it seems like it's so difficult for organizations to do threat modeling properly?
I could spend an hour on this question.
I'm sorry. No,
it's a great question. It really is. Let's boil it down to two things. One is, as we move from threat modeling a physical thing that we've grown up with to threat modeling a technology we're working on, the attacks are different, our intuitions are off, and so we've built a bunch of structures to try and help people do it. Some of those structures, as it turns out, don't work particularly well. Right? We talk about taking an attacker-centric viewpoint and short form. It's really hard to walk a mile in someone else's shoes. It's hard to predict what a bad person is going to do if you're not a bad person.
Right.
So some of the structures we tried didn't work. But then one of the things that happens is everyone writes their advice about threat modeling. Right? And let's say you were going to make dinner, right? And so you go and you do a search and you say, how should I make dinner? And you get back one recipe that has chicken in it, that's a chicken dish, and one recipe that's a soup, and one recipe that's tacos.
Right.
Right? And they're all titled How to Make Dinner. You don't have a concept of recipes, you don't have a lot of skill in cooking. And you're looking at these 3 different things you've printed out from the internet. You're trying to make sense of them. And it's like, well, this one says I should do this, and this one says I should do this. And when we talk about threat modeling, we don't say, here's a recipe for making a chicken soup, or here's a recipe for threat modeling a web system. Here's a recipe for threat modeling a mobile phone app. We just label it all threat modeling methodology, how to threat model. And so people pick this stuff up and they get confused, they get frustrated, and frankly, sometimes they pour their chicken soup onto their tacos and they say, well, this was a ridiculous way to make dinner.
Or you have a really nice tortilla soup. Or
you might. If it works, you can get there. But if it doesn't, you've got a gloppy mess.
Right. Right.
Right. And a lot of the advice on threat modeling that you find on the internet is actually fine if you do exactly what it says. It's when you combine this stuff up that it gets problematic.
Right. Right.
Is that why your book is so thick? Because the people I've talked to, and when we have conversations about threat modeling, they think it's pretty easy. They think it should be a pamphlet, right? You take the egress and ingress points of your application and, figure out where the data flow is, and then mark all the places where things might be able to either intercept or interfere with the data flow, and identify those things, and then, account for those, right? That's it in a nutshell.
Yeah, and that works great in a nutshell. And one of the things that I do, I'm doing training now, and I have these wallet cards, which you guys can see.
Uh-huh.
And on these wallet cards, it says, what are we working on? What can go wrong? What are we going to do about it? And did we do a good job? Okay. So I don't even need a pamphlet anymore. I can put it on a wallet card for you.
Nice.
And there's a lot of details, right? Let me work my analogy a little bit more technically, right?
Okay.
If you want to do a vulnerability assessment, you go get a vuln scanner, you run it, you deal with each thing it reports.
Mm-hmm.
Totally legit, right?
Right.
Maybe you don't need anything more. Maybe you do. And the goal of having the book was to capture the lessons I had learned over when I wrote it 15 years of threat modeling, now 20 years of threat modeling, and address the questions and address the places I see it break down. When I do a training class, the thing I tell people is you should not listen to me because I've invented any of this. You should listen to me because I've been yelled at by more people than anyone else on the planet
Right.
about the way in which their threat modeling process didn't work. And so the book is designed to capture those lessons and say, if you're using an entry point, exit point, what do you need in the middle? Is it one big blob? Is it a couple of blobs?
Right.
And the simplest advice I can give is look for the word sometimes and tell a story. Go to the whiteboard, draw what you're doing, and tell a story. And every time you say sometimes it does this and sometimes it does that,
right,
draw some additional boxes and things. And when you can tell a story just pointing and you don't have to get the whiteboard marker, you've got a pretty good diagram.
Nice.
You can get a whole lot fancier, but that's the essence of it.
So you wrote this book, and admittedly you say that this was, it's been several years since the book was written. There's new technologies out there. You've got your cloud, your IoT, you've got all these other technologies. Is the book still applicable to what's going on out there, or is it just because it's in a different, if it's in the cloud versus a data center, that the differences haven't really changed much?
So the thing about threat modeling is it's about abstractions, right? And if what you're looking at is a picture of some data flowing from, say, a thick client app to a server versus a mobile phone app to a cloud server, not that much has changed at one level. There are a lot of changes which have happened, but the modeling techniques don't change very quickly. The forms of threats that we see when we model those threats and we think about things like spoofing and tampering, there are new forms of spoofing that come along, right? Apple just released face detection. How are people going to spoof that? Right. I don't know the answer. I know there's some smart folks over there who are worried about it, but to my mind, it's all spoofing. Right. Tampering with data in an S3 bucket is different than tampering with data in an Oracle database or a MySQL database. But at some point, we want to make sure that there's data integrity. And one of the things that I hope people learn as they develop skill in threat modeling is that these high-level models of the attacks transfer as the technology moves. Now, I've learned a bunch about IoT. I've learned the cloud stuff I'm comfortable with. The IoT things, I think there's a little bit more. There's really interesting challenges in the engineering of IoT. I don't know how much it changes the threat modeling for IoT, though. I haven't figured that out. When I go and I help companies that are building devices, we threat model in fairly similar ways to when I was threat modeling things like Windows and Office at Microsoft.
Okay. So everything is just really an application with data that moves from point to point or something. It really all boils down to moving of data and the pipelines and the processes. It doesn't matter where it sits or how it sits. It's just data and communications back from A to Z.
Pretty much. You get different features from the operating systems, right? Before the call, we were talking a little bit about the difference between iOS and Windows in terms of what the operating system allows, what it protects you against. So there are differences, and there's also really big similarities.
Okay. All right. So I did the threat modeling workshop at Source with Robert Hurlbut. I wanted to have him on the show too, but he's got a new job that precludes him from doing any new stuff. So
Mm-hmm.
sadly, we had to. You're not the backup, but you were. Oh God. Okay, that didn't sound.
No, Robert's a good guy. I've talked to him about how he teaches. We've learned things from each other.
Very cool. Okay. So I learned about what I thought. Okay. So what my idea of a data flow diagram was completely different from what I expected a data flow diagram to be when we were doing the threat modeling stuff. He broke it down by processes, boundaries, and data flow and data storage and privilege boundaries and stuff. Is his way of doing it, obviously, because you have talked about companies rolling their own threat modeling type of models. He has a different way of doing it. Do you follow a lot of the same principles, or is there a different way that you do your data flow diagrams when you're doing threat modeling?
So when I was at the OWASP Summit in June, we did some great work with the Juice Shop guys.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And we did 3 different models. One was a data flow diagram. The data flow diagram ended up representing the Jenkins build process for Juice Shop.
Okay.
One was a state machine. We used a state machine to reflect the state of the app because Juice Shop is essentially a single JavaScript application.
Mm-hmm.
And then the third was a set of swim lanes. And I bring this up because to me, the question, you can go back and forth with different data flow diagram selections. One of the things that makes this hard is you can go to Microsoft and you can see descriptions of physically different diagrams, all of which get labeled as data flow diagrams. It's not DFD version 1, 1.1, 1.2, 2.0. So Robert may do that a little differently. I do it a little differently depending on what the thing I'm working on is.
Mm-hmm.
Right? The thing I recommend in the book as a starting point is derived from modernized, and one of the things I want to update at some point is really say, this is DFD 3.0. You'll see here's 1.0, here's 1.1, here's 1.2. There's a lot of archaeology in that, and it's not super exciting. The question I have for you is, are you able to represent a system that you're building today with the stuff that Robert taught you? If you can, awesome. Don't change. If you can't, let's talk about what the difficult parts are and figure out a representation that's meaningful so that we can talk about what are we working on.
Right. So, okay, so I kind of want to walk us through kind of, how you get started with the threat modeling, but where should threat modeling be employed? Is there any one specific place in, assuming you have an SDLC or a secure, software development lifecycle, or you're using SecDevOps or SecDevOps or whatever version of it is right now, where should threat modeling be? Should it be throughout the entire project, or is there a specific place where it fits better? So the rule of thumb is threat model as early as you can. Okay.
And then there's details. And again, this goes back to the question of why is the book so thick? Right? If you're doing a waterfall, do an all-up threat model early. Do what I call chess playing threat modeling as you're working on features. I'll come back to that. And then at the end, check that the model of what you were planning to build relates to what you're shipping.
Okay.
Chess playing is the back and forth, right? I put a lock on my door. The attacker can pick the lock. So I put an alarm on it. The attacker can cut the wire. You do that as you're building it, so those threats are fresh. So that the mitigations, the defensive features which you're building respond to those things, and they're fresh in your mind as you're building those defensive features.
Mm-hmm.
Now, when you're building instead of doing waterfall, you're doing more agile, right? I talked to a team recently that was doing 1 week sprints.
Goodness.
How do they threat model? They've got a big wall diagram that says, this is what we're building. Someone says, and my feature that I'm going to build this week involves this data going from here to here to here. And there's no changes to the trust boundaries. There's no changes to the data flows. We're just processing this data differently.
Okay.
We are done with threat modeling that feature. Someone else says, I'm going to actually add a new flow. We've got a new RESTful API that's here. We're going to be standing it up. In this sprint, all we're doing is standing it up with a version and a back and forth. But we know we need to authenticate it. We need some authorization. We need some logging.
Right.
And so we're going to backlog some of those because it's more than a week's worth of work.
Okay.
So when you get into the how do you fit it in, the rule of thumb is early, and then the specifics are based on what you're doing.
Right. Right. I can understand that because, like you said, Agile is constantly adding new features, whereas Waterfall, you have a requirements document that says at the end of this, we're going to have X product with X number of features. So it's much easier to do threat modeling. It seems to me that the Agile or the DevOps, DevSecOps, whatever, is constantly, you have to be fairly mature to be able to do the threat modeling in that manner. You can't just, that's, I hate to use the word unicorn, but that's a rare instance where you've got developers who are that plugged into security to do those things, right?
Yes and no. I find the team, so I think there are two ways that people use the term agile.
Okay.
One is we are hyper-disciplined about test-driven development because we know that if we invest the time in building tests, then we can move quickly and we'll detect the breaks as they happen.
Okay.
Those teams invest heavily in training, in process, in testing, and they can also invest heavily in security and get it right in their world. The other meaning of agile is process stinks. We're not going to do anything. We're going to move fast and break things, and we'll fix it when it goes down.
And documentation is for losers.
Yep.
Yeah.
Well, all the agile people have an expression, which is you ain't going to need it.
What, the documentation?
Yeah.
Because we all have it up here in our brains, and nobody is ever going to have to need a user's manual.
A couple of simple diagrams may be all the documentation you need. And so it depends on your meaning of agile. I see agile teams threat modeling successfully, right? It's a different definition, but if you are shipping daily, shipping weekly, well, if some tests take a little while to run and they're running out of band, that's okay. You can ship a fix just as quickly as you can ship a break.
Right. Yeah, we've talked about this in the past where you don't patch backward, you fail forward. So It's like, oh, it didn't work this time. Well, we're just gonna send out something else in a day or two or 18 hours, and it's gonna fix that and add this thing. So you don't patch backwards. Yeah. Okay.
I think one reason that people don't embrace threat modeling, at least early on, maybe when some incidents happen or whatever, is because they believe that they know what the threats are. They don't have to model it. They know, they're experienced, they're instinctive about what can go wrong with their application. Can you speak to that?
Yeah. There are people who absolutely can. When I was working on my last startup, my CTO was a guy I met at DEF CON a long time ago. We had some very, very lightweight threat modeling for what we were doing, right? We wrote it down so that we were literally all on the same page. And we found a couple of things and we're like, fix that, fix that, fix that. And we never really went back to it because we were in sync well enough. Mm. When I work on a team, one of the guys at the training class last week said, we've got 150 different feature teams. How do we work with them on supporting them? Right? And right. For that, it's about consistency. It's about engaging in such a way that team A maybe has a security person on it. Teams B, C, and D don't.
Right.
If B, C, and D don't think about security at all, then team A has awesome security. The product as a whole does not. Mm-hmm. So there's absolutely times when the right thing is very lightweight. It's a discussion over lunch. We're worried about this as we build this feature. Okay, let's deal with that. If that's all you need, that's all you need. I've got no problem with it. It's when, there was a leader of the Food and Drug Administration who came out with a speech a couple of months ago. And she said, organizations making medical devices need a comprehensive, systematic, and structured approach to security.
Wow.
I'm glad to hear her saying that. We know what the threats are doesn't pass muster for that environment.
Right.
If what you're making is a game that runs on the phone, maybe it does.
Yep.
Right. And so this to me is why, some cookbooks are easy and simple, right? 30-minute one-pot dinners. And some cookbooks are 4 days before you plan to serve the meal, do this.
Yep.
Right? It's all cooking. It's all threat modeling. But your threat modeling and mine might look different this week and they might look similar next.
Right. So,
but those, some people may be naive about how, or they may think they're better at threat modeling or security than they actually are. And so they're fooling themselves and putting out a product that from a security standpoint is toast.
Yeah, we're on the radio and I'm nodding, which is awesome.
So, I mean, okay, so it's funny because, back during the Bush administration, I'm not getting political on this. There was a gentleman who was the Secretary of Defense. He was Donald Rumsfeld, and he came out with these things called the unknown unknowns and the known unknowns, and that's how they, handled those things. And the unknown unknowns were the things that they didn't know, and all these things. And that's kind of like what threat modeling is. You have to know what the known knowns are, the known unknowns, what do you call the unknown knowns, and there was like 4 different ways of doing it. But it's very interesting how the threat modeling and this everybody laughed at him because he's like, oh, the unknown unknowns, but that's really become kind of a household. We don't know what we don't know. And that's why we do threat modeling, because it helps us reduce those kinds of attacks, the what we don't knows kind of thing.
Yes. Yeah. And to jump back a minute, it is absolutely possible that people are fooling themselves and thinking they know the answer when they don't really. And a little bit more structure would do them good. It's hard to convince someone that they don't know that they're not doing the right things.
Right.
I like your point about the unknown unknowns. It actually goes back to a model in psychology called the Johari window. And I'll get you a link after the show. I'm not going to try and search. but it's about what we know about ourselves and what others know about ourselves.
Oh, wow. So he actually knew what he was talking about when he was saying that.
Everyone likes to make fun of him, but there's actually some really interesting science behind it.
Okay. All right. I think I found it. Anyway, so all right. So when you're doing a threat model, there are different threat models you can follow. I have some down at the bottom there. There's a stride model and the dread model. Wikipedia was kind enough to show me one called Pasta and Trike, which I've never heard of before. Stride and dread, we've actually done shows on before. Does it matter which one you do, or is it okay to even say, well, I'm not going to do any of those. I'm just going to kind of move along and do my own thing. Do you have a preference for which ones work better in certain organizations or certain, in certain types?
So I've become fond of Stride myself. I used to hate Stride. When people describe Stride as a taxonomy, it's a bad taxonomy. What Stride is really useful as a mnemonic, and for those who don't know, Stride stands for spoofing, tampering, repudiation, information disclosure, denial of service, and elevation of privilege. Mm-hmm. I've said this a lot over the years.
Right.
And you can look at a system and say, where's the spoofing? Where's the tampering? Where's the repudiation? You can look more specifically. You can say, how can I spoof this component? How can I spoof the endpoints of this data flow? And the advantage to Stride in that sense is you can keep it in your head and use it without needing any support materials. Okay. The Trike system is if I'm remembering it correctly, it's been a few years since I've looked at it. It's an asset-centric system which has a spreadsheet. If it works for you, great, go for it. Pasta has 7 steps. The authors describe it as a risk-centric system. I think of it as a useful tool for a consultant because it starts out with a lot of interview steps and tries to focus in on the risks at the end in a way that works for some consultancies. All of these are simply ways of answering the question, what can go wrong? And I would actually say that Trike is its own methodology. It's bigger than just what can go wrong. Pasta is its own methodology, which has 7 steps instead of 4. The one thing I do want to mention is don't use dread.
Don't use dread.
Do not.
How come?
Dread is a lovely acronym and a bad risk management approach. It stands for discoverability, risk, exploitability, and I forget what the other 2 things are. And the trouble is, you assign a 1 to 10 rating to each of these things. You average them out. There's no guidance as to what gets a 3, what gets a 7. And so it's not a useful thing. And really, I would say that the goal shouldn't be to classify the threats. It should be to help you find them, right? And to go back to your point a minute ago, if you've been in security for a long time, maybe it is sufficient to draw a picture on a whiteboard and start throwing darts at it, right? Just brainstorm about what can go wrong.
Right.
I believe, without even knowing you well, you guys run a security podcast. You know a lot about the subject. You can probably do a good job without Stride, Dread, Pasta, Trike, or anything else. Frankly, you can do a good job without my book. What does the book get you? What does Stride get you? It gets you towards structured. It gets you towards systematic.
Consistency is the key. Right.
Yep. If the 3 of us were in the same place and we had a bottle of scotch and a whiteboard, we would probably do a fine job threat modeling a system. The trouble is, let's say we get rat holed on something. Let's say we're all looking at it and we say, we think we found all the threats. Something like Stride will give you the ability to go through and say, did we look for Stride on this element? Did we look for spoofing on this? Did we look for spoofing on this? Did we look for spoofing on this? And assess how you're doing in a way. And, Boettcher can do that for you. Trike. The advantage for me of Stride is that I don't need a checklist. I don't need a mnemonic to do Stride anymore. There's a system called Stride per element. I've now drawn that chart so many times that I can do it from memory. I think there's probably 4 or 5 of us on the planet who can do it from memory.
Nice.
It's not a popular skill. It doesn't need to be a popular skill. It fits on the back of my little wallet cards. The advantage is threat discovery rather than threat classification or threat categorization.
Okay.
So you said that Dread is a bad risk management approach. What makes Stride a good risk management approach? What do you mean by that risk management approach?
So Stride is a good way to find problems. Dread was an attempt to answer the question, what are we going to do about it?
Okay.
Right. So you find a bug,
Mm-hmm.
you find a security issue. Maybe it's a bug, maybe it's not a bug. The goal of Dread was to be able to say everything that scores a 6 or better will get fixed.
Mm.
The reason Dread is not useful there is because you can argue about what a 6 means for each of its subcategories.
Yeah.
There's lots of ways to answer the question, do we need to fix this? If you're getting started, I'm going to say something controversial. Do the easy fixes first.
Quick wins. Sure.
Quick wins to convince the organization that it can do more.
Okay.
Wendy Nather likes to talk about the cheeseburger approach to security. You go to the doctor says, you're having trouble sitting up straight, you're overweight, and you say, Doc, I might have a heart attack, but I'm going to keep eating cheeseburgers and I'm going to wait and see.
Doctor's going to tell you to quit eating the cheeseburgers.
Microsoft uses a system, and again, I hated this when I first encountered it, and I've come to appreciate it. It's a bug bar. And the idea is all remote anonymous elevation of privilege attacks are severity 1. We have to fix the Sev ones before we ship. All information disclosure attacks tend to max out at severity 2 unless they relate to security information or they violate a specific security rule.
Mm-hmm.
And the thing that makes this useful in a software-centered organization is that you can get through, do we need to do something about this relatively quickly? This is above this bar. We have to deal with it in this way. And integrates well. And the reason I hate it is I'm a security person. I enjoy having debates over how important this is. How likely is it? How impactful is it? But I'm also a product person. And when I'm shipping something, I don't want to be having a debate over whether or not this bug is important or not. I want to get to consensus. We're going to fix it. We're not going to fix it. If we are, let's get to fixing it, not debating it.
Yeah.
If we're not, we're being consistent in the way we're dealing with this bug so that we can look back and say, yeah, maybe we should have made a different decision about this, but these are the decisions we made, and we're giving you a consistent level of security across the whole thing.
So it sounds
Does
like
that align well with quantitative or more so qualitative?
I would say it's a qualitative approach. There's no attempt to rate probability. There's no attempt to rate impact. But as I think you both know, those are both hard arguments to have.
Yeah.
Right.
And
So you're simplifying it for the sake of getting the product out in a reasonably secure fashion, right? And relatively quickly.
Yep, precisely.
Yeah, because I was about to ask, because we're talking about assessing risks sometimes, and I was like, well, okay, so at what point, which comes first, the threat model or the risk analysis? And it seems like risk analysis would somewhat come before, depending on the type of risks that you're analyzing. I mean, I'm not talking like, fire, flood, tornado, hurricane kind of stuff, but I mean like, the what ifs, the spoofing and all those seem to be like you'd want to assess those before you started your threat model to find out if those things actually exist in your system.
Well, I would say that your threat model is a way to assess if those exist in your system. Right? That you draw a picture of what you're working on and you say, how can these impact us? And ironically, the things you rattled off, fire, flood, hurricane, that's a model of threats.
Sure.
Right? That's no different than stride in some sense.
Yeah. Okay. Very cool. Okay.
So there's two approaches to risk management. One is what I call the top-down approach, or what I think of as the top-down, right? We're going to think about our reputational risk. We're going to think about what risks should the board worry about. The other is to say what risks exist in this system. And there are very different approaches to risk management. And the approach that I've been taking lately, and this is actually my my talk at Source, is the board is very good at thinking about risk, right? Your board of directors, your successful company takes risks every single day. Some are quantifiable, some are not. We go up to the board and we say, we're good at thinking about risk. And they look at us a little funny. And then we say things like, we're managing these risks and we're doing this risk management stuff. And the thing that the board actually wants to know is what is your strategy, right? Where are you putting, and what they mean by that is where are you putting the money, right?
Yeah.
And they want to know about governance. They can handle risks. And the point of my talk at Source was, let's focus in on what I call cyber portfolio management. What is in your portfolio? What are you spending your money on? And how do we approach that? Because if you make it concrete like that, the board can say, we're spending all of our money on detection and not on prevention. Is that really where we want to be?
Maybe.
Maybe it is, maybe it's not. But you're giving them a concrete set of questions to think about. And we've been told for years that we need to talk business. And so we've started talking about risk. We talk about risk a lot. We talk about risk management. And my former boss, Steve Lipner, wrote a thing with Butler Lampson. I'll get you the link afterwards. And he said risk management is super hard. We should actually give people much more concrete things to do.
Yeah.
What does that mean? Give people more concrete things to do because risk management is so hard?
Well, if what they say in their paper is if you actually break out what's in the NIST cybersecurity framework, There are something like 250 controls that they tell you should do. And each one of those controls requires professional judgment.
Sure.
Their argument is NIST should come up with a list of 20 or 40 things that you should absolutely be doing that don't require judgment. That you can, and figure out how to assess those things.
Can you give me an example of something you have to do that doesn't require judgment?
Run antivirus.
Right.
Have a firewall.
Segmentation.
Okay,
of your LAN.
so security 101.
Yep.
Basically.
Kinda
But
like
the security 101 is never 101 because it always includes you could do this or that. No one wants to write it down and say, these are the things that you absolutely must do.
Well, nobody likes to be forced.
What's in 101?
Well, nobody wants to be forced to do those things. It's like when I did some consultancy for HIPAA, it was like, these things are addressable. They don't care how you do it. They just want to show that you're doing some due diligence. So if network segmentation is what's required to protect that data, do that, or, set up firewalls between your LAN segments, or, as long as you're addressing protect the data to what you consider to be due diligence and whatever the assessor believes to be due diligence, then, you're good enough, and some that gets lost in the noise sometimes, it seems.
So their point is that we need to stop deferring everything out to assessors.
Yeah.
That we need to construct hard and fast rules for what this is. And that's difficult, right? And let's stay with firewalls for a minute.
Okay.
You're deploying firewalls in a medical environment. What is good enough?
Is a host-based firewall good enough? Maybe your security guy says yes.
So, with no disrespect to my dentist, I don't think my dentist should be making that call. I think someone should tell my dentist, you need a firewall that's configured like this.
Right.
Right. My dentist has a, 4 or 8 person practice. Right. For PCI, you go to a restaurant down the street and they're told they're supposed to do a risk assessment. And again, no disrespect to any restaurateur here. How are they supposed to do a risk assessment?
Well, that's why they outsource it, right? They outsource it to their IT, or they
don't
outsource
have to. A small company like that can do a self-assessment.
Well, yeah, but how do they know to do a self-assessment, or how do they know how to do a self-assessment properly, which is why they outsource these things to their IT provider, who will also then look up and outsource to yet another party who would do that assessment for them possibly.
You put on antivirus, you got PCmatic. Is that the right one? Right.
I think the problem is if you define the same thing that everybody has to do and have the same playing field, one, some companies who are small may not be able to afford those solutions, and it would be impossible for them to implement. Two, if everybody has the same model, that everybody has the same vulnerabilities, making attack across the board greater, because it seems like mixing up the environment or the ecosystem would make it harder for attackers to attack different companies. So if,
I'm going to disagree with that last and say I see no evidence that attackers are having any difficulty attacking anyone.
Yeah, fair enough. Fair point. But it seems to me it's like if it affects, say, Walmart, and Walmart has the exact same security system as, I hate to say Target, but Target, because it's the only one I'm thinking of right now, then, breach for both of them would be imminent. I mean, and that would, and Walmart would be, oh crap, Target just got hit. We're going to get hit now, or if we haven't already been hit.
So I encourage people to take a look at the paper. It is thought-provoking, and I've got a link for you.
Cool. Yeah. We got tons of links this time. Lipner, not Lipson, sorry.
No, actually, you had it right. It's Butler Lampson.
Okay.
And Steve Lipner.
Ah, okay. Very cool. Thank you. All right. Well, wow. We blew through this hour like nobody's business, didn't we? Mr. Boettcher, do you have any other questions? Because I feel like we've only kind of just scratched the surface on this.
I always have more questions. All right. So you mentioned that you went to a new security paradigm conference, meeting, whatever. What is a new security paradigm?
So the new security paradigms workshop is a really interesting academic workshop. And when I say workshop, there were two things that distinguish it. First, there's no laptops, no phones on the table. There's 30-ish people who attended. And for an hour, you sit there and you workshop a paper. You give feedback to the authors on, here's how I would improve this paper. Here's the thing that I don't understand. Here's the challenge that you have. And the idea behind it is they take in work that's not quite ready for the big conferences, the big academic conferences, and they help you improve it.
Interesting. Never heard of these before.
Nice. Does everyone there have a paper, or does everyone there just contribute to a predefined set of?
So there were 12-ish authors who had papers and another 18 people who didn't.
Wow. Okay.
Gotcha.
And the idea is to just take new ideas and help them grow in an environment which is explicitly supportive.
So there's no wrong answers. It's a brainstorming session, kind of like.
Well, brainstorming, but also positive brainstorming. You're supposed to start each bit of feedback with something positive about the work.
Okay. Very nice. Okay. Obviously,
it's fascinating.
It's invite only.
Did you have a paper?
I did not. I was invited to be on a panel there. And I'm doing some collaboration with an academic who's trying to figure out how to make an idea move forward. I'm going to leave it at that because it is new. It's not quite baked yet.
Yeah.
And he's trying to figure out how to bake it.
Is the blockchain involved?
It is not.
It probably should be. Everything has blockchain in it now. So.
My machine learning algorithm tells me that blockchain startups get funded faster.
Yes, I saw that story. Oh my goodness. Stock went up like 400% because they changed the name and had blockchain added to it. It's crazy. It's crazy.
So Adam, because of where you've been, I'm going to ask you this question because you have maybe a little insight. Maybe you can share some of that insight with us. But I was wondering. Now, you talk to some people who may not know better. I don't know, but they say that all the attacks nowadays, 90% of them are Microsoft Windows. Right? Windows is just ripe for the pickings right now. You've got the macros and you have 1,000 different auto run locations. You can persist in Microsoft, things like that. And in order to safeguard your company, just move to Linux or Mac and you're good, right? You don't have to worry about these hackers anymore. What is the future of Microsoft Windows that you know of? Is it gonna decline because people may say, hey, let's move off of Windows, go to Macs because we're having a problem with ransomware, right?
It's a small question. So let me just say yes, or maybe I should say no. So first, I think that the differences between the major desktop operating systems are relatively small. There's bigger differences between Windows and iOS or Windows and Android than there are between Windows and Mac OS. So I don't think the security win of jumping to Mac OS is going to be huge. I do think the training cost will be large. But let me actually go back to the beginning of your question, which is all the attacks are Microsoft. And it's been a few years since I actually had my fingers in this data pile. But part of getting auto-run fixed was, and this was removable media auto-run, part of getting that fixed was actually a model of how attackers are breaking in. And that data was sparse. The reason it was so hard to fix is because everyone loves to say, oh, it's Windows' fault. And yeah, there are some design issues that are coming to the fore right now. Where are people getting the data that says it's all Windows attacks?
Well, most of the Trojans out there are Windows based. The emails you get have macros in them. They have
Sure,
Word
but
docs.
that's based on what's popular today, right? I could rewrite that malware to run on Linux. I maybe could or could not get it to work. The macro-based stuff, yes. But if I fool you into clicking on something on your Mac OS or your Linux desktop, it runs with all the privileges of the user that you're logged in as.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm not, I don't know that you get a big security win. And I don't, and the other thing is, at least a few years back, there were more attacks on Flash and there were more attacks on PDFs than there were on Office docs. Don't know if that's changed, but I do know that the data that I was able to see was a little different. But overall, I think that the job of the CISO, the role of the CISO in protecting the organization from attacks, how much safer do you think you would be on a Mac, right? If you could quantify it or even qualify it, are you twice as safe? Are you much, much safer?
Well, you'd have to get the data on what the market share is and the data on the new types of, I guess, malware or breaches coming out. Like how did they actually infiltrate the organization? Was it a vulnerability in a website or was it phishing on a Windows box, that sort of thing?
I wish we knew that. How rare is it that we can actually say that Struts is the way someone got into Equifax?
Yep.
That's like gold, but we see it once in a long while. We don't see it frequently.
Are you saying that based on the platform you have, if you don't have Windows, you may have a false sense of security here?
Maybe. I was actually making a slightly different point, which is that companies that get broken into should explain what happened better. Right? They already pay the PR costs. They already get sued, but we don't get to learn from their mistakes.
Yep.
And if we knew more about how companies were getting broken into, we could answer this question that you're asking so much better than we can today, right? We can quantify. Because to go back to what you said, was it a Windows desktop and a phishing email, or was it a website vulnerability?
Mm-hmm.
If it's a web vuln, then switching out Linux for Windows does you precisely no good. And I've seen recently claims that 90% of break-ins come from web vulnerabilities and 90% of break-ins come from phishing. And I know that one of those two claims is false.
Yeah.
At least.
Yep.
At least. They cannot both be true.
That's right. That's right.
But I don't know how to I don't know how to prove it one way or the other.
Right. So would it be fair to say that all things being equal, the operating systems are generally just as vulnerable as each other?
Approximately, yeah.
They all have different, methods by which the vulnerabilities can occur. So,
yeah, and I also think you have to, you really have to be fair, you really have to compare, apples to oranges. You have to compare the latest Mac OS versus the latest Windows, right?
Mm-hmm.
And the difference in, because if you're comparing the latest Mac OS to XP, yeah, XP's in rough shape. Windows 10 with Control Flow Guard, and I know they just stopped doing Emmet and replaced it with something else whose name I forget. Writing exploits against that stuff is tough.
Right.
Right, and this is why we're seeing a rise of attacks on design choices, is because the RAND, when I was growing up, we could just shove stuff into a stir copy and boom, you had EIP. It was easy.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Now it's these chains, and really this is why threat modeling is so important. Is, did you think about the attack path with DDE? Did you think about the attack path with Office macros? And once you ship something like that, it's hard to pull out, right? The reason it was hard to fix auto run was because, you guys both look young, so you may not remember this, but it used to be you got a CD with software on it, and it would say on it, on the CD, physically on the silk screened onto the disk, it would say CD E : and type setup.exe.
Yep.
Right? Auto run was put in place to reduce support costs. Once you put that in place and people take a dependency on it, it's hard to remove.
Sure.
Your threat model, you can have fewer bad outcomes like that.
Nice. Well,
so I got one more question.
Okay, because we're way over.
So, yeah. I looked for the game, and I'm assuming it's the card game, right? On threat modeling and elevation of privilege.
Yes.
Is that the one?
Yep.
Okay, I could not get it. This was about 2 months ago. Where do I get one?
So if you go, I am, knock on wood, I've got a better solution, but if you go to threatmodelingbook.com/resources, there's a link to Game Crafter, there's a link to eBay. I'm having a good conversation, and I don't want to jinx it by saying anything before it's ready, but I think I have someone who is ready to sell them so that they'll be available at a good price on an ongoing basis. And as the person who made the decision to Creative Commons license them while at Microsoft, I don't feel like I should be selling them myself. Right? It looks a little chintzy.
Yeah.
And it bums me out that they're so hard to get.
Yeah.
Well, you need to touch Steve Jackson games. I mean, he's done great things with Munchkin, so.
I can print them out. There's a PDF available.
Yep.
So, but, just rather buy one stack, right?
No, I'm with you, and I'd love to. And actually, you mentioned Steve Jackson, so funny story. The second game I helped with, which is Control-Alt-Hack, really it was Tammy Denning's work at UW, and I was just an advisor. But we licensed a game from Steve Jackson.
Oh, nice.
As the mechanics and rules for Control-Alt-Hack.
Fantastic. Okay. Well, today I learned. All right. Yeah, I got some.
And the game.
Go ahead.
The game still applies, right?
Yeah.
Are there new cards that I need to download or something, or is it pretty stable?
It is pretty stable. And look, occasionally someone comes up to me and says, I want a card for this. If you want a card for something else, number one, it's Creative Commons license, so feel free, have at it.
Yeah.
And Creative Commons attribution, so it's totally legit to do that. But two, email me exactly what you want the card to say. Right? I would be happy to extend it with stuff. But a lot of times it's very company specific. It's like, oh, we keep finding this thing. We want this card.
Funny thing is, it's still for download on Microsoft's website.
Yep.
So I'm going to put a link in the show notes to it for there as well. So
cool.
All right, cool. Yeah. So before we go, I want you to, if you can mention your new book that's coming out, please feel free to do so. Because I have to buy it, so it's going to have to be somewhere online.
So I don't know exactly. So the new book is on cyber portfolio management. What I recommend you do is, if you either come to my adam.shostack.org website, that's the easiest way, and we'll put a link in here to directly. There's a copy of the talk at RSA. I've been getting some great feedback on the book, closing up with a publisher on how to get it out there. So that should be out sometime next year.
Okay.
But available now is the threat modeling book. It is still current. It's still full of actionable advice. And so that's where I recommend people start with that.
Nice.
Out of the game.
Okay. You speak quite a bit. Are you going to be anywhere in the next few months where people will be able to get a hold of you or go and see you talk?
So I've been heads down with the portfolios management book, and also with training and consulting. It's been a busy few months, and so I haven't been out there speaking and training nearly as much. But hopefully the new book will get to done soon, and I'll do around there. But I try and be available at especially at Seattle events where I don't have to hop on an airplane.
Mm.
So, come out to your local thing and maybe I'll see you there.
Right on. Yeah, I know HushCon's coming up in December. I think there's probably still tickets for that. If, you need a ticket, I know a guy who knows a guy. So I can hook you up with that.
I will be at Hush. Yeah,
I'll be at Hush. Assuming we don't get 2 foot of snow in my house here and I can get down to Seattle like last year. So, yeah. So if people wanted to discuss with you about threat modeling or your books, or maybe hire you for work, how would be the best way for them to go about doing so, getting hold of you?
So if you just want to talk, drop me an email, adam@shostack.org, reach out on LinkedIn, reach out on Twitter. If you want to hire me to do stuff, I have a very simple website at associates.shostack.org. There's a link on the threat modeling book website. There's a link on my homepage. I try and be accessible. I try and be responsive. So, always always happy to talk threat modeling. A lot of times it can be a real, it's a 5-minute conversation. Here's what you need. Sometimes it's a longer conversation. I'm happy to start with a 5-minute. What's going on? How can I help?
But you charge a minimum of 1 hour, though, right? Is that how that works?
No, I don't. This stuff is hard to do, and having done it for so long, having been yelled at by a lot of people, oftentimes it's really easy for me to solve people's problems. If I can solve someone's problem quickly, I am happy to do so. Make the world a better place. There is more difficult, challenging work than I can possibly take on. Cool. If what you have is a simple problem, I'm not going to charge you for a simple answer. Because it doesn't do me any good to spend time negotiating over that when I can solve your problem faster than I can get an hour's pay out of you.
That's awfully nice. I appreciate that.
I mean, look, in security, there's a good community, and I've learned a tremendous amount from the people around me over the years. I'm happy to give back.
That's nice. Yeah, we have a fantastic community. We have a large number of people who are more than willing to help out, or come on our show and impart their knowledge to our listeners and ourselves. So.
No, and I mean, I do appreciate the chance to plug the consulting work, but I don't want that to be a deterrent to talking.
Sure. No, I understand. Well, we definitely went over our 1 hour, but I this is one I'm definitely going to be listening to again. Thank you so much, Sir Adam, for coming on the show. And I don't want to Hollywood you by saying we should do lunch, but I live in the Seattle area. I'm half an hour. I live up in Snoqualmie Ridge, so we've got a dynamite Indian joint up here, or I don't mind going to some pho or something like that. Or I do CSEC East, which is a meetup.
Have your people call my people.
Yeah,
we'll do lunch.
Yeah, we'll definitely do lunch. But yeah, I'd love to sit down and chew some more fat with you. So appreciate you coming on. So cool. Mr. Boettcher, how would people go and find you if they wanted to discuss the podcast or your application that you make because you're an evil developer? How would they go about finding you and doing that?
You can hit me up on Twitter at BoettcherPwned, BoettcherPwned.
Okay. Miss Berlin, she is sadly, like I said, not here, but if you are in New York at the O'Reilly conference, please feel free to hit her up and say hello. You can find her at InfoSystir, INFOSYSTIR on Twitter. And, she's fairly active on our Slack channel. Everybody's fairly active on our Slack channel. If you want to get on there, we have a lot of great information and discussions. We had some GDPR discussions. We have discussions on OSINT and pen testing and, reverse engineering and malware. Mr. Boettcher hangs out a lot in the malware section. But yeah, we're, you can sign up and join us there if you go to breaksec.signup.team. We also have the channel for our Intro to Reverse Engineering course, which Tyler Hudak is going to start for us on Monday. It's a 4-session class of 1 hour apiece on every Monday. You can go to our Patreon and sign up for that, and that'll get you access to the class and early access to the videos. And you only have to pay like $100. So, I mean, it's, Tyler's doing a lot of training and, malware analysis at DerbyCon. So we're really happy that he's doing the instruction for our class. So yeah, that starts on the 30th of October, which is 2 days from now. We're recording this on the evening of the 28th. So after 1 November, you won't have access to the class, but you can get access to the videos if you want. But you can get more information going onto our Slack channel and ask those questions. So. Like I said, we have a Slack. Thank you to our Patreon donators. That's how we, support the show, and it costs for equipment and hosting and our general work on Slack and everything. So we appreciate everybody who's giving us money to help support the show. So the show will always be free, but if you can leave us something in the tip jar, we don't hate on that. So you can follow me on Twitter at Brian Brake, BryanBrake. The show's Twitter is at Brakesec, BRAKESEC. And, we're on iTunes, Google Play Store, Player.fm, TuneIn Radio, iHeartRadio. We're all over the place. So there's no reason for anybody not to be able to get a hold of us. We're cross-platform, if you will. So we'll be back again next week for a new next show. If you have any questions or comments, please send us an email, bds.podcast@gmail.com. So that was it. Thank you again, Adam, for coming on. You're always welcome to come on if you want to talk about anything. So we appreciate you.
Awesome. Thanks.
Yep. That was it for bringing down the security this week. Have a great week. Please be nice to one another, and we'll talk to you again soon.
Bye-bye.
And we're clear. Oh my goodness, that was so awesome. I'm gonna definitely have to listen to that one again. Yeah, wow. I'm sorry we ran out of time, but I wanted to, we're gonna probably do some after audio here. I didn't get to meet Mr. Toulouse. Dave Weinstein, who I know, he lives over in Duval. Got to meet him, and everybody I've seen on Twitter has nothing but glowing things to say about him. How did you know Stephen?
So I met him when I joined Microsoft, and he was just a ball of positive energy. The enthusiasm, the passion, the humanity, really just a genuinely nice guy who wanted stuff to be better and focused in on making it better. Honestly, I'm not good at eulogies.
Yeah.
I'm not good at explaining why someone was a good person. So how did I meet him? I probably met him at like the second or third Blue Hat, and then got to know him over the course. He was there the 8 years that I was there, plus a few years later. And you want any argument you would have with him, he had a principled position, right? I remember talking to him when he started running the abuse team, and I'm a big believer in free speech, and he said, look, this isn't a question of free speech. It's a question of, can people actually enjoy their time on our platform? and he showed me shit. And, years later, that shit was like Gamergate. People using disgusting pictures, disgusting names. And he's like, there's a level of trash talk, and then there's just a level of trashiness.
Yeah.
And when people hit that and he said, we don't need to let people be trashy to each other to make a great gaming system.
Right.
It was like, okay, and it's, and it was that focus. Where does the humanity of it link up with what we're trying to do, right? We're trying to make a great gaming system. What is that?
Right.
And not being able to get on because you're a woman, not being able to get on because you're gay. Just not a part of that.
Yeah. Yeah, we still have some ugliness in InfoSec that deals with that, and it always seems to happen. The bad things happen to the good people, and I guess the only legacy that we can have is that people remember us and we were loved. If we can go out of the world and make the world somewhat a better place and be remembered for doing so, then I think the legacy is cemented. I mean, people are going to remember that for a long time.
Yeah, and you can't know what that is or isn't gonna be. You just and it's like I was saying at the very end there. I'm not here to charge you for a 5-minute conversation, right? I'm here to help. I wrote the book to help people. I do a lot of stuff, right? I do volunteer stuff with OWASP to help people.
Right.
That's all any of us can do.
I mean, we started the podcast more to kind of market ourselves, but along the way it's become more of we've had people email us saying, hey, you helped us with this or whatever. And I was like, I didn't actually mean for it to be like that. But, it's amazing when you set out to do one thing, you actually end up doing something that becomes bigger than itself. And, I had no idea what the podcast would be like when it started, but it's become this behemoth of, community building and knowledge and sharing of ideas and helping people. And it's just, it's a weird thing. So I mean, I can only imagine the people that he's affected that have been forever changed by him. And I'm sad I never got to meet him. Or sadly, even more sad, I may have met him and don't remember what he looked like, because I have that problem. So, I just wanted to give my condolences again in person and face to face, and I'm sorry for your loss, and we're all going to feel that.
Well, thank you. He liked to quote Bill and Ted and say, "Be excellent to one another."
That's right. Party on, dude. Yeah.
Nice. And I think that it's the be excellent to each other that really we have to remember and keep with us.
Right. It's the nicer corollary to the Wheaton law, don't be a dick.
Yep.
So, yes. Yeah. So, sir, if you are ever around the first Tuesday of every month in the Redmond or Bellevue area, I do a monthly meetup called CSEC East. Crispin Cowan comes to it quite a bit. I don't know if you know Mr. Cowan.
I've known funny story about Crispin. I've known Crispin since 1998.
Goodness.
Okay. I was working my first startup, and someone walks up to me on a trade show floor and starts asking really hard questions about our product.
Oh, so you were the booth babe at the time.
I was booth dutying, and it was a small startup, so we were on like 8-hour on your feet shifts.
Oh goodness.
And so I was like, but you're not accepting my bullet pointed answer here. And finally I looked down and I realized he's wearing an IEEE security and privacy conference t-shirt. So I'm like, who are you?
Yeah.
He was like, I'm Crispin. And he had already done the stat guard work, so I knew his name.
Right.
And I'm like, dude, I'm giving the same answers every 5 minutes for the last 3 days. Can we talk later?
Right.
So yeah, so we worked together. We worked together a little bit. Then we worked together a few years later. We worked together at Microsoft. When is the event?
I do them the first Tuesday of every month. I try to do that for consistency purposes, as you said in your podcast. As a podcast, consistency is key. So I try to do them the first Tuesday of every month. In it's called CSEC East because there's a CSEC, but they don't meet very often. So it's Redmond, Bellevue area, but we meet at a different restaurant every time. So like next month is Mod Pizza in Bellevue, or we'll meet at Forever in Bellevue, or we'll go up to the BJ's in Redmond, or we'll go to Panera or something like that. So, we're just, we get together, we talk, we joke, we make ha-has and talk about security, and like Lee Fisher will talk about, UEFI security or whatever. And sometimes we'll get down to some really, real low bits. So we have a meetup page if you want to join us, but there's no pressure. If you don't want to, that's fine. But yeah.
No, I'm, whether or not I actually show up is a different question versus can I sign up and consider it? I absolutely can consider it.
Sure.
So
we have
that now.
We have a Twitter as well if you want to just do CSEC East or whatever, and we announce it on there. It's very low.
Honestly, I don't log into Twitter very much.
Really? Too much drama.
Not enough. I mean, it's hard to have serious conversations in 140.
Yeah. Well, for some reason, the Twitter gods have blessed me with 280. I don't know why, but I'm in the new beta. So if I'm on the app or I'm on the Twitter website, I actually have 200 and whatever characters, but the tweet deck still only limits me to 140. But I don't know why they gave it to me. I only have, so many people. I'm no Alton Brown or, you or, whoever. But I don't have a ton of people, but they still graced me with the beta. So
cool.
But yeah, I try not to abuse it though. So I still try to keep it to 140 characters. But
abuse it. There's 140 is not a law of frickin' nature.
True. Very true. But yeah, so I mean, if you can come, that's cool. If not, they still do tipplings second Tuesday of every month at Malt and Vine. So
yep.
Yeah. So, but
cool.
Yes, sir. Fantastic. I'm so glad you came on. And if you ever want to come back on and talk about anything, if you just want to read the phone book, I'm really up for that. If you just want to read the phone book, so
well, thank you. One closing question: when does it go live?
It'll go live tomorrow night.
All right.
Feel free to advertise it as much or as little as you want. We're just going to put it on our Twitter. I'll probably put it on Instagram as well. We don't have Facebook because it doesn't cost or doesn't pay to put that out there on there. So, but yeah,
very good. When it goes live, shoot me the main link. I'll throw it on my blog and I'll tweet it and get it out there as I can.
Sure. I appreciate that, sir. Yes. Okay.
All righty.
Cool. All right. Mr. Boettcher, I'll see you next week. Adam, I will see you at a social function or at CSEC East or whatever. And everyone have a good night.
Sounds good. Thanks for having me, and
Thanks,
have a great night.
Yep. Thank you. Good night.
Good night.
Bye-bye.